Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is one of our, I don't know, when last we had a physical launch like this. It's been quite a while, so I'm really excited. Also, I really like this book and I really like these authors. I'm their publishing editor, and it was a real pleasure working with them and learning so much from what they had to say about how we can change how we think in order to change how we go about making the world. So I hope you enjoy the evening and what they're going to share with us about what this book is truly about. Thanks.
Yeah, it's great to be at a live book launch again. It really, really is. I love books and I love music and I love things that I can't pigeonhole. I can't immediately say it belongs in this shelf in the bookshop. And this, for me, at the very beginning, is one of those books because, I mean, there is a man who has been an organizational change management consultant for 50 years, but that's after having been a Catholic priest, for goodness sake. And here is a man who was a political activist who went to jail on Robben Island, and after that went to Germany and studied as an architect, and then came back to South Africa just more than 20 years ago to become an agent for change in South Africa through his architectural practice. And it was absolutely fascinating to read the two different perspectives of these two men and to try and follow this sinuous journey which connects their two separate but related concerns. And if I may start with you, Leon, it's such an intriguing combination. The South African, the German, the two different histories. So how did it come about the two of you connected, and that connection led to this book?
Well, thanks a lot, John. Mbali, I have to say first that she forgot to mention how she actually whipped me in particular into delivering on time. Because one of the things that characterize our different perspectives with Klaus when we started talking about this book is that he expected the book to be done in about 2 years, maybe. It took us 7, or it took me 7.
That's true.
And the reason it did that, it's my first book. I've been working, okay, I was in the struggle, I was an activist, and I went to study, came back, but I've never really thought about what I'm doing. And it is through Klaus working together with me in Philippi Township, where he and Margarete, the partner, the wife, are donor funders who've been helping community projects in the Philippi Township for years. And I was found as their architect, and the head of this community center, Reverend Otto, is sitting here. He runs it. He looks after young people. He looks after the youth. He provides them with opportunities after school, before school, to have a soup kitchen. When they come back from school, they get accommodation to be able to do homework in the townships, because in the shacks where they live, there's no such comforts. So what brought us together was actually me being asked to work as an architect in that environment, a dangerous environment. We all know how townships are. But at the same time, I found Klaus with a German mentality, which I happen to know and understand because I studied there. So he was always precise, and Margarete, obviously, the funds had to be spent at a particular time. But they would expect that things would happen as one would expect in Germany. But we're working in the township. You go to the city council, it takes longer than one expects. And I found ways to still be able to spend the money that they had organized, satisfy their donors, account for the money, get the projects done, and provide the facilities for the youth of Philippi. And having experienced all that and our two very different perspectives, Klaus said, I actually cannot understand how you make things work in this environment. Because some of the project would really be extended over time because of our processes, our bureaucracies, and the difficulty just to get things going. And then whilst you're working with the municipality, you've got the community saying they want to be part of the project. And if they are not, they're going to stop it. So now I have to step back as an architect and say, okay, let's find a solution. I engage with the community and adopt what is normally done in government projects. And I said to Klaus and Margarete, we need to have a community liaison officer that we get from the community who's going to be the link between the contractor and the project and the community. So that's how we could find solutions to any problem that was there. So he said, I've been writing books all my life and I've been working in different environments. I think the way you manage to work and the way the situation is, I really think we should write a book together. That's how it started. This was like, okay, by now it's 8 years ago, but it spoke to me 7 years ago before the book was published. And that's how it all came about.
Because the subtitle is Lessons on Embracing Difference from South Africa and Beyond. And a lot of the book turns on who am I, what am I, how do I feel about who I am, who are you, what do I feel about you, who you are, what is the same about you, what is different about you, and how do we get along? You know, how do I embrace who I am and embrace who you are, which is different from what I am? And I wondered, Klaus, where that fascination came from for you, because that's essentially the sort of the center point of the work that you've been doing for 50 years within companies, managing diversity. So where did that arise in your past?
Also ich sage es in Deutsch und Sie übersetzen.
Ja.
Also für mich war schon von vornherein in meiner ganzen Arbeit, ich war Berater, ich war unabhängig und für mich war immer der wichtige Punkt nicht die Theorie, sondern was macht ihr praktisch und warum macht ihr das so und wie zufrieden seid ihr damit? Und es gab dann von vornherein schon vor 30, 40 Jahren für mich das Thema, ihr müsst lernen, die Betroffenen mit einbeziehen, von vornherein. Ja, aber wir wissen doch viel besser, wie das alles gehen soll.
Darf ich das
Okay,
kurz übersetzen?
ja, übersetzen.
Even as a consultant, I've been working as a consultant for a long time already. For me, it was always important that not the emphasis was not on the theory, but on practice. And I always wanted to know, how do you do it?
And how you integrate the people
Yeah.
that you work with in what you're doing.
That's the point. Und also das war schon immer meine Arbeit und dann haben wir uns kennengelernt, also als wir bei unserem Projekt, du hattest ja schon angeschildert, da gearbeitet hast und ich habe dich so erlebt, dass du verstehen wolltest, was wollen die, was brauchen die, wie reagieren die darauf und nicht einfach zu diktieren, das wird so und so gemacht und fertig.
And that is how I perceived Loyanda. That is how he worked. He wanted to understand, how do you do it? How do you feel? What do you think? Not what I think and I tell you what to do, but he involved the others.
Und wie ich das festgestellt habe, dann habe ich ganz spontan bei einem Treffen, also ich hätte das Buch allein geschrieben, ich habe schon angefangen gehabt, dachte ich, warum eigentlich nicht mit ihm? Und dann habe ich dich gefragt, bist du bereit, hättest du Interesse, das Buch mitzuschreiben? Dann hast du gesagt, wir haben noch nie ein Buch geschrieben, das macht nichts, dann fang einfach an und schreib drauf los. Du kriegst keine Vorlagen von mir, sondern schreib das, was dich beschäftigt.
I'd actually already started writing the book, but then I noticed how Loyanda was working, And I asked him, well, wouldn't you join me writing the book? I'm not going to tell you what to write, but you write it your way, and that is how this whole book was created.
I don't know how many of you have had a chance to have a good look at it yet, but it's intriguing in format in that some of it seems to have been written not by committee, but by the two of you collaborating. And then there are very personal moments from Klaus and very personal moments from Luyanda where they speak about what is very, very dear to their heart. And I mean, it's almost trite, but it's a really important question. How do we get on? You know, as a family, as a company, as a society, a community, as a globe of nations, how do we get on? And the theme of digitalization is also ever present throughout the book. And one of the sadder aspects of the technological capability and social connectivity that technology has given us is that instead of bringing us together, in many cases it is, you know, it's forcing us into compartments from where we shout at each other rather than listen to each other.
Und das war übrigens dann der Grund, weshalb es 7 Jahre gedauert hat.
That was the reason why it took 7 years.
Yes, weil, also, wir haben dann gesagt, du hast mir gesagt, ja, ich schreibe jetzt das und das. Bis dann und dann. Was nicht kam, war er. Dann habe ich nach einiger Zeit gefragt, wo bleibt es? Ja, weißt du, mir ist noch was eingefallen, mir ist noch das begegnet, das möchte ich gern einbeziehen. Und so ist es immer, hat sich so entwickelt.
Luyanda would say he would give me, write something in that and that time, and then it didn't come. And in the meantime, Luyanda had thought of something else that he wanted to contribute to the book.
Essentially, it became a collaboration, John. Some of the parts of the book, we won't go deep into it, are about us conversing and discussing and getting to understand one another in the first place. And I think that is the core of the book. How do different perspectives bring two people together who work very differently, but at the same time manage to string those thoughts together to come up with a book which eventually got published. Do you mind if I read a paragraph?
No, love to. You've got a real reading voice. Can't wait.
Yeah, because I thought, I mean, as we are, you know, thinking about all these things we're talking about, there are certain aspects of the book which for me are quite important. This is in part in the introduction where I'm expressing some of my thoughts. In summary, our world can benefit from our diverse experiences. The Germans have a word for it, Zukunftsfähigkeit, future readiness, basically, which is a key theme of this book. Strategies towards a sustainable and shared future require an understanding that the world is a dynamic place with different perspectives. We need an open mind to understand the complexity this presents on a daily basis, but also as a philosophy for life. We need to embrace the understanding that the logic of the one can benefit the other. As society, we must and should encourage dialogue and make room for everyone to contribute their capabilities. The world needs more dialogue, tolerance, inclusivity, empathy, and solidarity. Attributes I learned during the years I spent in prison on Robben Island. There is no one perspective and no single answer to the problems we face. It is no longer possible to apply one-sided top-down approaches. The economies of the world are interlinked and complex because the disparities between the wealthy and poor nations remain significant. Only by talking to one another will we benefit from a more equitable, socially balanced, and hopefully economically and environmentally sustainable world order. The book is about us reconnecting with one of the key characteristics which I also associate with us in South Africa, talking, dialoguing. Without that, we could not have resolved the problem of apartheid.
Yeah, talking is important, but so too is listening, and listening is more absent than talking, it seems to me, these days. We want to talk, we want to be heard, but we want far less to listen. And that's why I thought that the controlled dialogue experiment that you do, where, I don't know if any of you have done this before, but two people are talking. It's an exercise that you can do in a family or in a company or in an NGO, whatever the case may be. And one person starts and may not be interrupted, because we interrupt each other all the time. For us, conversation seems, you start, I'll interrupt, and then you'll raise your voice a bit and interrupt me, then I'll interrupt you back, and before you know, we're taking out knives and we're fighting. And you have to listen. And so I'm listening, and before I can then respond, I have to repeat to you what you've just said. Because I know, talking on the radio as I do 3 hours a day, I know that often I stop listening and I start thinking about what I'm going to say next when I interrupt. So in this exercise, what you have to do is you have to repeat back to the person what they've just said to you. And that shows that you really, really have been listening, because if you can't, then you haven't been listening. And I mean, it's not practical to do that in world politics. One can't put Lukashenko and Zelensky and Putin together to do that. But as a philosophical approach, it's to stop thinking, stop trying to interrupt, stop trying to put your point of view, but listen. And that's what the two of you did, it seems to me, for a very long time, Klaus, is you listened to each other.
Wobei ein Punkt da besonders wichtig ist, was Sie ansprechen. Viele verwechseln den Dialog mit betrachten Kommunikation, sagen, ich habe kommuniziert, und sage ich, was hast du gemacht? Ja, ich habe denen erklärt, was geschehen soll. Das ist keine Kommunikation, das ist Information. Du informierst nur, aber du kommunizierst nicht. Kommunizieren heißt, ich möchte gern verstehen, was du denkst. Ich will es wirklich verstehen, was nicht heißt, ich muss zustimmen, aber ich will es verstehen. Und ich behaupte, wenn der andere spürt, dass ich ihn wirklich verstehen will, habe ich gewisse Chancen, dass er mich auch anhört. Und dann, ja.
The problem is that people often say, but we had a dialogue, and it turns out that person then actually only informed the other person, never really listening. And it's different if I really want to listen and understand what that person wants to say. And chances are that communication will then come from that.
I think what Klaus is alluding to, which I also had to learn in the process of writing the book, is that communication is not a one-sided affair. It's basically, multi-way. And if it's two people, then it's two-way. I can have an opinion, as long as I don't listen to your opinion. My opinion is just information to you. We have to communicate, and I have to listen to your opinion, and then maybe we can find a way of defining. So I don't fully agree with you that you can't put Putin and Zelensky together. You actually can. They just need to be willing, both of them, to listen to each other. Because at the moment, I don't think anyone is listening to the other, nor is the world listening to each other on that conflict. So I think for me, it's very, very important that when we look at dialogue and communication, what you've referred to is very, very important. We're talking here about specific situations where we're trying to find solutions. I mean, I guess you can have this at the family level, where your child maybe has got different views to you. We try in my family, my wife is sitting here, she's actually been always pushing me to write a book because of the stories I would tell to the kids and the way I raise the kids through persuasion, but firmness at the same time. So I think that balance that we need to strike is important, even at company level, at country level, at the level of nations. I mean, we probably can come back and talk about my observations in South Africa, having been here 20 years, you know, after spending 15 years in Germany in exile. And I realized that actually, we've also stopped communicating as a country. And I ask myself, are we actually still on track with the promise that we did in 1994?
No, we deviated far off that track, and we're trying to get back onto it. How successfully, I don't think we can determine at the moment, because I covered the constitutional talks in Kempton Park, and I saw how much not listening there was, how much information instead of communication there was. And that would, you know, from 10 o'clock in the morning until midnight, there would be that shouting and not listening. And then somehow tiredness sets in or whatever, and then you could see the delegates starting to actually listen to each other and starting to say, okay, well, I've put my position now it's time for me to listen. And it's from those late night, early morning sessions that the breakthroughs came, when people realized that the other had a point of view that was worth listening to.
Dazu kommt dann noch, das hängt damit zusammen, ich habe bei dir dann auch festgestellt, wenn Konflikte aufgetaucht sind, hast du gesagt, der Konflikt muss gelöst werden. Und gelöst werden auf der Seite, ich muss den anderen verstehen wollen. Und nicht, ja, ich habe ein Problem mit dir und das wird jetzt so und so gemacht. Ne? Und die also Lösung von Konflikten ist einer der ganz wichtigen Aspekte.
In addition, I noticed with Loyanda, when there would be a conflict, Loyanda would say, I need to solve this conflict, and I have to solve it by really wanting to understand what the other one wants, what the other one means.
Well, as I was saying, John, you know, when you work in the environments we work in, you actually work as an architect. You've been trained in design. You've been trained in the design of buildings. You've been trained in the performance of materials. You've been trained in structural understanding of how buildings are put together. But when you get to the township and you work with communities like we have, sometimes you have to step back from that high professional kind of position that you hold, that you're coming here with ideas, you know how buildings are put together. You actually realize that you've got to understand the things behind the conflict. And I mean, in the case of Itembalabantu, where we had one particular conflict, it was about Reverend Otto wanting to develop a city-owned land next to the center. It was a dumping ground. In the Cape Flats, if anybody knows, there's something called detention ponds, because it's all below mean sea level. So you got to hold the water when it's raining, and then you let it flow into the city stormwater system. So Reverend Otto came with this idea, and Margareta and Klaus, that, you know, we could build a sports field here. They asked me whether we can do it. I said, of course we can, but it's going to be expensive, because the surface you need for it should be able to withstand water during the winter months, and then when it's summer, the water drains away and the kids can play. So that was the idea. But the conflict that we had is not about that. It was about the community saying, this is public land, it can't be privatized, because one of the key things for that project was that we must fence it. But people walk through there all the time, from their homes to the taxi rank, which is just opposite the center. And the question was, how do we solve this? Because now the people are saying, well, it's public land, and it's true. It was going to be leased to Itembalabantu. The community says, this project cannot happen without us being involved, because this is how public land is used. And I mean, don't think people don't know stuff. They know. So now we had to think, okay, how are we going to do this? Because for this to work, it has to be fenced, firstly, so that there's control. So I thought that, okay, let us first bring the community on board. And I went to meetings in Philippi at night because the people work and they're only available in the evenings. So I had to go there and meet with the ward councillor, meet with the people and say, okay, look, guys, this is a privately funded project. It's not funded by government, where there is normally the extended public works project and there's a proper process. It's a privately funded, in fact, donor-funded project from money coming from abroad, Germany mostly, and Austria. And it's bringing a facility for your children. So I think we should find a way that the project should happen. But given the fact that you want to be involved, I'm going to suggest that we use what government normally does in public projects, that we have a community liaison officer who is going to be making sure that people can be sourced, local labor can be sourced, and they're part of the project. Of course, it took weeks because, you know, with ward councillors, it was like, I should be the one determining who works there and whatever, and when you find out it's the branch leader and the branch chairman and the secretary, you say, fine, but the person who's going to be the liaison officer cannot be an office bearer. Now, that's me saying it can't be an office bearer because you don't want this to be a party political thing. So now, these are the issues you deal with on a day-to-day basis, and you've got to understand how the people function, but you must know also the systems that work and that work in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned moving away from top-down interactions, and these kind of consultative processes are very, very frustrating because they take a long time. There are a lot of people, all want their say. But you've got to move away from saying that because I have a B arc or an M arc, I know best. And it was one of the problems in this country, and I think in other countries as well, is that the poor are decided for rather than decided with. And it seems to me that the approach that the two of you have taken, and which you sort of theoretically encapsulate in the book along with some personal narrative, is no, you know, you can't, we don't know everything. We know some stuff, but you people know some stuff as well. And even if it takes us a long time, we need to find out what it is that you know and how we can marry what we know with what you know.
You know, John, Ithemba Labantu is one project that brought me and Klaus together. But I mean, I work in other projects in the townships for government. We're currently upgrading an informal settlement in Philippi, not linked to any of, you know, what brought us together. And my experience, again, even in a project like that, is that decisions are made about how we should be rolling out the subsidy housing program for communities, and where it should happen and how it should happen. But working in Philippi, I actually went into an informal settlement with my office. We walked in there, right in Kosovo informal settlement. And we could have been mugged for all I care. But firstly, the way we approached it was that we'd like the community to know that we are coming as people who are assigned to work on a project here. However, we want to first familiarize ourselves with the environment to understand how the society works, how the community works. And we found that the community in that environment of 15,000 people, where there are 6,000 dwellings, there's one tap for every 80 people. There's one toilet for every 65 people. You can't get in there with an emergency vehicle, ambulance or police vehicle or fire brigade. We know this. And we found that, however, the people are so organized that they actually know each other. They even know the criminals around there. And you find that actually the criminality that happens there is not from those people. It's coming from outside. Because they know if they find one of them being or doing stuff which is untoward, they know where to find them. They know where to get them. We found a priest who had been running a kind of a church complex, which at the night becomes a clinic, because when the people get sick at night, he's able to give them food and give them comfort and water until in the morning they can go to hospital. And in the understanding of the housing program, we're not even supposed to be talking to the people because decisions have been made. You don't want to create expectations and everything. But without me understanding what's going on in there, it's impossible to design. And this is the thing which I think is at the essence of the book, and what, with working with Klaus, actually made me think about these things. And I hadn't done so before. I was just happy to be working and never thought that actually these could be lessons that could be shared and teach us how to engage at that level. And what you're saying, therefore, is, I think, very, very important, that the idea that we decide for people and not engage with them is gone. That time is gone. And part of the problems we're having is that even at the political level, we are expecting our politicians, our leaders, to do stuff for us. We expect them. Of course, we expected them to help us with COVID. For the first time, I think South Africa knows there's something called a family meeting, because for the first time, the whole country could sit and listen to the president and say, we need you to help
We
us.
were listening to him. He wasn't listening to us.
Well, that's another story, of course.
But I mean, to get back to your obvious concern, your obvious love for this country and your involvement in this country and trying to make it a better place for people to live in, particularly poor people to live in, through your particular field of expertise, which is architecture. So designing buildings which are relevant for the communities in which they live and which reflect the needs and the resource constraints of the communities in which you're building these structures. And have we, how far have we diverged from that that negotiated agreement, which led us to the Constitution and which led us to our first genuine multi-party democratic election? And I mean, I think I'd be interested to hear your views, but it does seem to me that we moved into a different country for a while, and now I'm hopeful about some of the. And I get very frustrated with Cyril because he's such a consensus seeker, and I sometimes want to stamp my foot and say, do something. Stop consulting with people, do something. But your approach suggests, and the sort of philosophy embedded in the book suggests that he's on the right path. He's trying to get everybody to agree to something so that when it happens in a forward-looking and forward-thinking way.
In a way, yes, but also no, because if that consultation process or that consultative approach would not just be at a point where we are trying to maybe deal with or solve problems that we've become aware of, and therefore action needs to be taken. If it was about that, I would say I understand and I fully support the consultative process. The problem we're having, though, is that, in my opinion, and this is what I try to write about in a very kind of layman's, perspective, is that the body politic has itself abandoned that consultative process across the aisle. It happens maybe within the party political circles that people talk to each other, but I don't think across party political divides that consultation is happening. Because from my understanding, our political parties across the board, can you name one thing that they agree on in South Africa, right? So where is the talking? Where is the consultation? So for me, one of the chapters of the book which deals with Ubuntu and Klaus was the first one to say, tell me about Ubuntu, what is it? And is it still relevant today? So
Yeah, I found that an interesting, that's written as an exchange between the two where a question is asked and an answer is given and you read the dialogue, yeah.
yes, and it made me think, because one of the things I realized is that, I mean, I left to Germany with my Ubuntu-ness from South Africa, and I got there, I was greeting everybody, standing up at the cube when some older person is standing up, or a lady, and I would kind of like be wanting to be happy and friendly to everyone, and I actually realized that no one cares about me. So I also realized that my concern for the other, for the guest as the better person, or not as a better person, but give preference to the needs of others, I wouldn't go far with that over there. So I had to temper my Ubuntu-ness to actually say, okay, I've also got needs that are important and that I need to take care of. And yet I didn't want to abandon that which was fundamental to me, that aspect of respect and that aspect of inclusivity, that aspect of being consultative, that aspect of being persuasive. So I had to find a balance. So Klaus was like, you know, is it still relevant today? Do people still live like that? I said, it was the foundation of the political settlement. Without that, I doubt South Africa would have resolved its problems. But obviously society is changing, and we also have to understand that change affects our day-to-day. And I mean, the youth of today, whether it's the Gen Zs or the millennials, don't quite get the Ubuntu thing, because they've been brought up in an environment where the freedoms are made available to everyone, where people can talk back. The Constitution enshrines the rights to everyone, even to a child. And it brings problems of, can you actually raise your child today? But I think that we need to get back to that position where Ubuntu was about not just agreeing with the people that you like, but it's also about reaching out to those that you don't like. And I think we've lost that, to be honest.
I think certainly at institutional level, I would agree that we've lost that. We have an enormous trust deficit in this country. Civil society doesn't trust government, government fears civil society. The labor movement hates capital, capital distrusts the labor movement, and there are no real consultative conferences or conversations that happen between those institutional elements of South African society. But what I do think, and it's one of the things that gives me hope that maybe one day yet, hopefully before I die, we'll get closer to the sort of South Africa that was embodied in the ideal of our constitution and the settlement that was reached in the mid-1990s. And what it is that outside of the spotlight, outside of the television cameras, outside of political leadership, trade union leadership, big business leadership, South Africans still kind of, it seems to me, want to help each other. Mm-hmm. That when there is a disaster, when there is a big fire like there was at Masiphumelele Christmas 2 years ago, the outpouring of help and concern and relief, money and goods, suggests that there is still a sense of, I am fully human because I realize my humanness through you.
Definitely, and I mean, you don't need to go as far back as Masiphumelele. We know what happened after the riots in KwaZulu-Natal last year, where there was a big bang in the country. Others called it insurrection, others saying that it was an uprising and everything. But when dust settled, you could see how people got together and said, hey, by the way, this is our country. Let's get together and let's make it work. Let's try and get over the fact that it potentially could have been support from one particular person who at that particular time found himself going to prison and so on and so forth. But there's an underlying problem that makes people to feel that they need to express their opinions the way they did. And in fact, the people themselves realize that this is actually counterproductive. And people were themselves saying, it's our jobs that are at stake here. And you found other provinces saying, no, we're not going to allow this in my own province, Eastern Cape and Tata, my favorite city of the country. People said, there's not going to be any looting here. So there was a different sense of communication that happened, because that fundamental aspect of the people actually, believing in not just themselves, but in the other as well, comes through always. So we just maybe miss the continuity and ensuring that in our day-to-day, we don't forget that value system. And in a way, I think we have. And I mean, look, this book, to be honest, when I eventually put my thoughts together, I keep saying to Klaus, it's not a blueprint to solve the problems of the world. But I've found people who've read it and who said, maybe you should convert it into a handbook, because some of the examples you guys give and your experiences could help in people thinking about things a bit differently. And that was never the intention, but I think the fact that my mind was, in a sense, activated by Klaus and our working together got me to think a little bit more about myself and about issues.
Klaus, can I ask you whether the experience that you've had in South Africa working at Ithembela Bantu and the very different way that you work there, which Leander has described to us, whether you've taken any of that back to Europe with you, whether there are any learnings from your South African experience which you've adopted into the work that you do with companies in Europe?
Kannst du mir noch mal genauer?
Ja, können Sie irgendwas von dem,
Lernen.
oder können Sie sagen, ob Sie irgendwas hier gelernt haben, was Sie jetzt nach Deutschland zurücknehmen?
Ich lerne immer dazu, weil, nochmal, also für mich ist ein Punkt noch wichtig. Du hast das beschrieben mit Verhalten und so weiter. Es gibt einen Satz, der heißt, ich kann mich nicht verhalten. Geht nicht. Viele sind irgendwo drin, läuft nicht gut und dann halten sie sich raus und sagen, ich mache lieber nichts. Und meine These ist, wir sind genauso verantwortlich für das, was wir nicht tun, wie für das, was wir tun.
Okay, einen Moment. Sonst kann ich das nicht alles übersetzen. I keep learning, and on another note, I learned from Luyanda. Luyanda says, I cannot not act. I need to act.
Yeah.
Because if you don't act in a given situation, you're just as guilty as those
Somebody who's
who-
acted badly,
who has
acted
acted
malevolently.
badly. So we have, it is imperative upon us that we should make a contribution. It might not be acting, but find ways to resolve issues and conflicts. And that's the responsibility that I feel from my side I continue trying to do.
And something else I found particularly fascinating about the book is your musings on your profession, architecture, and the role it could and should be playing in improving social realities for poor people.
Can we just allow, I think I would like Klaus to talk a little bit about whether there's anything he learned and whether
Okay.
he took back, and then we can come back to that. Klaus, ob du was mitnimmst in deiner
Ja, ich
Arbeit?
habe es ja verstanden.
Ja, okay.
Also, für mich gibt es überhaupt keine Unterschiede.
For me, there are no differences.
in Deutschland, ich war ja auch international tätig, es ist überall das gleiche Problem. Ich weiß, was ich will und das setze ich durch.
The problem is the same everywhere, internationally too. I've worked internationally. I know what I want to do and I will do that.
Und wenn mir etwas nicht passt, dann halte ich mich raus.
And if I don't like something, I just take a step back.
Also insofern ist für mich das null Unterschied, wenn ich hier bin. Also ich lerne hier genauso viel, wie ich in Deutschland oder sonst wo lerne.
So,
Das Thema, so denkt der Mensch. Der Mensch will sich schützen und möglichst sich rausmischen für Dinge, die ihm nicht passen.
this is how people think, and I must say, and people want to refrain from things that they don't agree with. They just rather take a step back. And I must say, I learn as much here as I learn everywhere else.
Ich habe dasselbe in Japan gelernt, ich habe dasselbe in China mitgekriegt. Also der Mensch ist ganz simpel gestrickt.
People have been created very simply, actually. People across the world, Japan, China, everywhere, think the same.
But what I do know about Klaus and the way he responds to things, I do not think for him there is a simple answer to things. So in the way we've discussed and the way we have been operating, one thing I'm pretty sure he has been able to communicate about us in South Africa is the fact that notwithstanding all the challenges, we're able to do stuff. And I think in the world which is sometimes condescending and not understanding Africa, a message like that from someone who's been around carries a lot of weight to actually say that things do happen. When we raise money in Europe and we're saying we're sending it to South Africa, the place which is associated with corruption, is associated with this and that, rest assured your money is going to be looked after and it's going to produce the goods that we promise you. And I think for me that's a big aspect of the work they do and Margareta here.
So now, can you answer that question about the way you see architecture playing a bigger role than it does at the moment in improving social conditions in South Africa? And then I think we might have time for a couple of questions, if there are any.
Oh, yes, actually. Yes, I'd really hope that we can have some questions. I think that, look, we can take a step back, John. I was among the first group of black people to be able to study architecture in South Africa.
Because black people can't think in 3 dimensions, eh?
Black people can't think in 3 dimensions. They cannot understand those complexities. And in fact, you know, I was asked at university whether I had asked for a second opinion to study architecture because it was like, it is not possible with the skills you have. I mean, I didn't have a portfolio. If anyone had asked me to do a portfolio, which the young students have to do today, I would have failed dismally. And in fact, I failed my first year dismally because I was not equipped for it. Coming from a Bantustan school in Umtata, Transkei, you know, never drawn anything on paper or use a color brush or anything. You know, all I could draw was a locus in biology or, you know, that kind of stuff. So essentially, architecture has always been a very elitist career. And it is quite true that there's a certain affinity that you need in order to be able to understand architecture. You've got to be, you know, good in maths, maybe others say, and physics and all this. But the onus is on your teacher to actually use their abilities to find out whether you actually can be an architect or not, and give you the tools that you need to be one. So at the moment, South Africa still sees architecture as a very, very elitist career, whereby those who make it, uncle was an architect or daddy was an architect, or maybe you know someone in the village who was an architect. When I was asked in Umtata what I'm studying, for years I couldn't explain what I'm studying, because what do you say architecture is in isiXhosa? It doesn't exist. I used to say, yeah, I'm working with buildings. They say, oh, are you a builder? No. I actually, you know, create, train in spaces. They say, "Oh, are you carpenter?" No, 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 no. I'm not a carpenter. So I think the issue about architecture has been actually presented in such a way that you think only certain people should be architects, and not only that, they only know about buildings. So, in a way, my view of architecture is that it has always been a socially oriented career. Architects are builders in the essence of it. And they were there to resolve the problems of society, facing terrible weather conditions from way back, creating more safer environments for the people. In the Eastern Cape, my professors in Germany got me to understand why a hut or a rondavel is what it is, why it is so cool in summer, and why it is able to withstand those climatic conditions without any air conditioning. I started understanding why there are small windows in the rondavels, because there's a science behind the rondavel. The walls are made of good thermal performance. The mud and the wattle doesn't transmit heat through the structure. The thatch roof that we say is backward and of course it will catch fire is for the roof to breathe. So I got to understand how architecture actually in its simplest form has evolved. And my professors in Germany would say, we're going to teach you about modern architecture and the whole industrial part, the climatic control issues and thermal performance of buildings. But we need to understand where you come from. How does life, culture, people's day-to-day activities influence buildings? Because this is what in the end matters for you to understand what you're doing. And through that, I realized that an architect is not just a person who designs buildings, but is a person who actually finds problems to social issues. And this is my orientation in architecture. One can think we're only doing projects in the townships. I did the Radisson Red Hotel across the road here, for the waterfront. So, no question, those skills are part of what I've learned. But the one which is missing in South Africa, and that's why there are so few architects working in the townships, doing the kind of work we do, is because it is not as rewarding, it is not as lucrative, it is dangerous, it is difficult, you don't understand the people you're working with. I had to present projects in isiXhosa in Kosovo, informal settlement. What I've never done. And the people were ululating there, because they had this Mtembu speaking architecture of the highest level in their language, which I think was amazing for me to even realize that this is how it comes across to the people. So I think we must demystify architecture and realize that it is a profession that can contribute towards improving the lives and the realities of people. It has the ability to help us understand spatial justice in a different way, because we're fighting for political justice, we're fighting for all the other, justices and human rights and everything, but we forget that there's a spatial inequality that persists till today in South Africa, and it has not been addressed. There's no city that can actually say that having gone through the political solution, we've actually gone through a spatial transformation to make the cities more inclusive. None of them. So I believe that as architects, we've got a bigger role to play in that as strategic thinkers who can help. Not that we are just about, you're a designer, you cost too much money, we can't pay you, but what are your ideas to resolve the problems of the cities and of the townships and so on? And that is something that is really, really missing and is frustrating to us who see architecture as not an elitist career. And as a final point, one of the things that really influenced me in Germany when I was doing my course, there was a subject there called architectural sociology, which is about understanding the behavior of people and how that impacts on the spaces you create for them. And this is what I'm doing. This is what has helped me to be, I would call it a better architect, because it's very important that you understand the people you're building for, you understand the environment you're building in, you understand the climate. Every architect might be taught in that way, but do we really practice it like that? Do we really contribute? Does our government even recognize us as architects to be those strategic thinkers? I don't think so.
Are there many questions? You were so perfect. So perfect in everything that no questions are left unanswered. Ja, Klaas, if you want to please go ahead and say
Ich würde
something.
gerne noch so einen Satz dazu sagen, zu dem auch, was du da gerade geschildert hast. Es ist immer die Rede von People, People, People und dann von Leadership, Leadership, Leadership. Und meiner Ansicht nach sind alle verantwortlich. Nicht nur die, die oben sind und dann top-down alles regieren wollen, und die, die von unten nach oben nur radikal sind. Beide werden scheitern. Beide müssen sich vernetzen. Und ich muss als Verantwortlicher überhaupt in mich interessieren, was denkt die Bevölkerung, was denken die Mitarbeiter, und nicht ich entscheide und die haben umzusetzen. Umgedreht wird es genauso falsch, und es geht darum, beide Aspekte miteinander zu vernetzen.
I've heard people, 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 and leadership, 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 but it is very important that both have to network together, and that it's not a top-down approach, and but that people at the top listen to those at the bottom, because everyone's responsible, not only those at the top or only those at the bottom. Everyone's responsible.
What you're responsible for now is coming up front and having your book signed, and if you haven't bought a book, then you are responsible for buying a book and then bringing it forward to Klaas and Luyanda to sign for you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for reading.
Thank you so much. That was whirlwind. Thank you so much.